process, like almost any property, you could start to go, they've abandoned it, it's all my property, we've got to deal with it. Just like somebody who's a landlord. But you can't just say, because it's on my property, they've abandoned it. That's not how it works. So there's a process you have to do. I would say documentation is important, because in courts, if it's not documented, it doesn't exist, if that makes sense. That's why letters and all these other things are really important. One of the questions other people have asked me is, what's fair compensation? When it comes to this issue of unjust enrichment, there's two basic ways to figure it out. One is, what does it cost and what's a reasonable profit? And then the other is, what is the value to that third party? I believe, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe in your state, it's what's the value to the third party. You need to talk to a lawyer to find that out. And here's the deal. That number is a lot bigger than the cost versus a little profit, right? So that's the number you'd want to ever have if you got to go in front of a judge. One of the other things is it okay to set a national rate like CHEP and the PACO have done? Or should you really set a regional rate based upon differences within regions? I've argued there should be some regional issues that are in there. What profit rate's fair? CHEP's profit rate, if you consider its corporate parent company plus the individual divisions, is probably somewhere between 15 and 20%, I've been told. So if they're able to have a 15 or 20% profit, shouldn't you be able to have a 15 or 20% profit? Just a question. And I don't know what you would say your costs are and are not, and whether or not the current asset recovery or the previous asset recovery program were fair. How should rates compare to profits for whitewood pallets? Whitewood pallets is what you're in the business of doing. So if you've got to deal with all these other things that are outside your normal course of business, that ought to be as profitable or more profitable, right? Particularly if you're helping out a competitor. And I've often wondered if maybe the best way to do this is to take the average price of like a number 1 and number 2 grade pallet and then subtract out your repair cost, and then maybe subtract out your acquisition cost, and that's the base minimum of what you'd be paid. Now, for some people, that $225 would be more than fit in there and be great. I also don't know for you whether or not you've got to pay to get those CHEP pallets. That's an issue for a lot of people as well. Is everyone tracking this so far? I want to make sure. Okay. Because there's a lot of stuff in here. I was trying to tell my girlfriend what I was going to go do, and she scratched her head. It's like, what? like you're going to go talk to people about blue pallets? I'm like, well, kind of. I'm really talking to them about the law. And they're like, oh my goodness. Because here's part of our problem. Telling our story is difficult because it's not easy. But I really believe you've got a better story to tell than CHEP does, and PACO, and those other folks. Once I've ever sat down and explained to somebody what this is really about, I've yet to have an American go, well, that seems fair. Most of them were like, I thought slavery ended a long time ago. I was like, yeah, I thought so too, where basically you'd have a right to decide at what price you work for somebody. And that's kind of the way that system has been set up. Now, that may not be completely fair. I'm not trying to really, paint a horrible picture here. But I also think what they've done is they've come in and they've used their size to bully. That's really a better word. They've bullied other companies to get them to do what they want. And I guess if you're big enough, sometimes you can get away with it. The good thing is public opinion really wouldn't support that, I don't think. Running the numbers. The Penn State survey that I mentioned that was connected to that class action lawsuit, here's the numbers they found. They found that recyclers on average, this is from 2005 to 2008, lost $4.78 for each pallet they handled. CHEP pallets. Yeah, for each CHEP pallet they handled. Now, they found out that after compensation, so whatever the asset recovery program was, it was $2.38. So if that's then, what about now? Now, I will say this. They found that it really varied significantly with how much you lost based upon a lot of factors. One of the biggest factors that no companies have really figured out was the lost opportunity cost of their trucking. That was one of the biggest because most guys didn't know how to calculate it. It took some smart guys from Penn State to figure it out. But the range was anywhere between $1.62 to $13.14 for how much it cost them to handle that. A lot of it was distance from the DC, how efficient their process was set up, did they have automation or not, all these other things that factored into it. And that's one of the reasons it was actually hard to certify a class, is because they couldn't show that everybody had been damaged equally. So when it comes to running the numbers, and you've got to figure out what your costs are, here's some of the things to look at. Did you have to pay to get the pallet or not? At the very least, it's taken up the space of a whitewood pallet that you could otherwise sell. Did people bring this into you, or did you have to go get it? And then after you went and got it, how many times did you touch it or sort it or move it? Then how long did you store it? For y'all, I know that's a huge issue with your limited storage yards, right? Some of these guys I talked to out in like Ohio in the Midwest, you would see their storage yards and your mouth would go open and go, wow. Like you would be like, we could one day have this much storage? Whereas I've seen some of the facilities here in California, Southern California, very small amount of storage. You ought to be able to charge more because of that. Plus, we all know the price of land here is very different than the price of land in Pennsylvania or Ohio. So, am I preaching? Is someone hearing? Yeah, okay, good. Also running the numbers, the mock case. This came out, one of the cases that I talked about earlier, the mock case. Internal CHEP people said back, this is years ago, that the value of return services for CHEP could be $4.67 or higher. So that's what the value is to them of what you do. That was then. I wonder what it is now. And that was from one of CHEP's own financial guys. Without recycler services, rental companies would have to rely more on expensive third-party trucking, warehousing, and collecting services. And any of you who've ever worked with those yahoos know they don't really know your business. Can you imagine J.B. Hunt trying to be a pallet recycler? It doesn't work. The ARP made the 100% solution possible. What is that? That's where CHEP went to all their customers and said, that's fine. I know it's out of network. You can send it anyway. That's one of the reasons they grew so much. So you're one of the reasons they grew so much. So for some of you who go, I don't need to worry about CHEP, if you've lost customers to CHEP, yeah, you better be worried. The other thing here is CHEP charges higher rates for sending pallets to MPDs. So sometimes those rates, those costs are already covered, right? The cost to pay you that ARP is already in that. But if you don't end up getting as much in the ARP, what does CHEP do? They put that money in their pocket. I talked to a financial analyst who told me that this new lower ARP may result in a $20 million boon to CHEP this year in CHEP USA. 20, that's your money. 20 million. Got someone's attention? Okay, all right, good. ARP rates go from $2.25 for delivered pallets to $1.67 plus a fuel surcharge. Rates for CHEP collecting for recyclers that load the pallets dropped from $1.25 to 98 cents per pallet. Those letters started coming out to people across the country in May of this past year. We were the first ones to report on it. We put out a market report called the Recycle Record, which I encourage everyone to get. It's not that expensive. It's like $145 a year. And we were the first ones to tell everybody this was going on. I knew about it. I knew after the first letter went out, I knew about it within 3 days. So had you been getting our market report, you would have known about this in May. You could have already started working on it, planning on it. And so I want you to know that we are here to help. You know, I don't really... It's a little dangerous for me to stand up here and speak against multi-billion-dollar corporations, okay? But I believe in our industry. I believe in the importance of what you do. And I don't believe those companies are going to say evil. They're just doing whatever they can do for the benefit of their shareholders. But if it's at the cost of you, you've got to do what's the benefit of your shareholders, which may be your children, right?
That's right.
So I just want to encourage you that we're here to help you, but I'm not an attorney, I'm not an association leader. All I can do is get you information, and you've got to decide individually what you think is right. I know that many of the recyclers I've talked to in the East are just going to put up with it. I think that's a shame. What I've encouraged most recyclers to do is this. So where am I at with time? Because I'm sure there may be some questions. Okay. What I've encouraged most recyclers to do is this. Actually, I'm going to come back. Why might CHEP have changed its asset recovery program? I've been asked that question. Here's what I've been told. Basically, a couple large brokers, and I'm not going to name them because y'all probably know who some of these guys are, started going around to people that were part of CHEP's network and saying, if you stop being a participating distributor, we'll start sharing some of this ARP with you. And there was one or two that talked about doing it, one or two that did it, and that scared CHEP because its business model relies on participating distributors. So they get that, well, if they've got money to share, some of these big brokers, then maybe we're paying too much. And so what happened is they're like, we've got to cut out that incentive. As they told me, or some people connected to them told me, we've got to cut out the fat. And that's what they're doing. So really, some of this is because some of your people you might even do business with were going about that. Now, I don't know that what they were doing was illegal, because really those big retailers were coming in and going, we want part of this money, right? And those are the customers of CHEP and the customers of other people, of Payco and those kind of guys. So I also think one of the things is they've always felt like they're paying like a bounty on their pallets. And they don't want to incentivize people to go out and take pallets that otherwise are in network. And one of the big arguments is what's in network and what's not in network. Now, here's the way I always told CHEP. If you can show me a letter that says this company's in network, then it's in network. If you can't show me a letter that says they're a customer, they're not your customer. But, you know, they don't always like that, but to me that's the truth. Either they're a customer or not. These big companies are going to claim they're in network when they may or may not be. Now I will say this, CHEP has done a much better job of having a real network than Payco has. So I probably would more believe that a lot of these companies are in network with CHEP where they may not be with Payco, or vice versa. But the fact of the matter is that even if they have an existing business relationship with them, really they're the ones who are on the hook for those pallets, not you. Unless you've signed a contract with that third party, basically you're not on the hook for those pallets. Now, if you return them, that's nice. But as far as, you know, CHEP, well, you've got to return them to us. No, if you're a participating distributor, you have to return them. If you're just a pallet recycler, all you really have to do is let them have access to it. Because once you hold it, that's when they might bring a conversion claim against you. I've already talked about this, but assuming 10% of pallets are collected through the ARP, the change in the ARP would result in an additional $20 million to the bottom line of CHEP Americas for the next year. What is a fair profit? CHEP's return on capital was 15% and averaged 20% for the last 5 years. So basically what you're going to find out is their average profit's been between 15 to 20%. I don't know what your average profit is, but most pallet guys I've talked with, if they could average 15 or 20%, they'd be like, okay, I'm in this business for 5 years and I'm going to Hawaii, right? Like, most are nowhere near there. So you got a letter from CHEP, so did almost every other recycler in the country. Here are some of the options. You can participate fully in the program. That's one of them. So if you decide, hey, I'm going to participate, I'm going to ship them to them, I'm going to have a GLID number, all that kind of stuff, that's fine. That's one option. Another option is you can allow CHEP to come pick them up. So you can kind of participate by saying, hey, I'm not going to ship them to you, but here they are, come get them, right? You can also say to CHEP, come pick them up. I'm not going to load them for you because you're not required by law to load them. And here's our cost. Here's what we're going to charge you for them, and we'll take whatever you're going to pay as like a down payment for it. Now, they're not going to like that, and they're probably not going to want to pay anything different. But when they say to you, you have to return them, unless you sign a contract saying you have with a third party, you don't. If they say you've got to load them for us, you don't. If they say you've got to do this and that, you don't. Really, all you have to do is let them have access to it. And at that point, they have really no legal claim against you. And I'm not a lawyer, but I've read enough on this issue that I know pretty much federal jurisdictions have all ruled that. And one of the other things I've heard people have asked me about, well, I've got a mutual customer who needs CHEP pallets. Can I send it to the customer for like a transport fee? I think that's questionable legally, to be honest. They could likely sue you for conversion for trying to sell that pallet. Now, I've seen people who've done it, particularly for people who are like, I'm deficient on a CHEP audit, and we're just going to send them back to CHEP anyway, right? So you help that guy out, and they cover your transport cost. That might not really bring a huge anger, because to be honest, CHEP does that with some people anyway. But once you start selling them for a transport fee to CHEP customers who just want CHEP pallets, that's where you're definitely going to really get their legal ire and anger. So can you guys win? Yes, the short answer is you can. If Ricky Mock can win, any of you can win. I'll tell you that now. Did he have to decide he wanted to win? Yeah. Did David have to decide he wanted to beat Goliath when everyone else told him you can't do it, you're too small, you don't know what you're doing? You see how big that guy is? Yeah, who won? David did, not Goliath. But you have to decide what you want to do. And I'll never forget this. A friend of mine who actually ended up in a legal lawsuit with him said, you go to war to make peace. This is not really about being against CHEP. This is about being for you and for your company. This is about you deciding what's important for you, what business are you in, what can you live with and what can you not. And no one else can decide that for you. But I know this, if you do go to war, you got to count the cost, and you got to know that they're going to bring everything. I can already tell you some of the things they're going to try to do. First of all, they're going to try to go after some of your customers. Second of all, they're going to try to figure out where those pallets are coming from. They're going to try to stop that volume. Another thing they may do is they may come to the association and go, you know, we can give some special sweetheart deals to a couple of leaders. I've seen that before. I'll be honest.
They're doing it now.
And they'll other kind of things as well. So, you know, you've got to decide what's in your own best interest. And once you've done that, I think you can decide what you want to do. They're also going to fight everything they can to get it gag ordered and not out in public. They hate it when I find out stuff. Because I have a big mouth, as you can tell. Short man, but big mouth. And I would also say you need to document everything. And here's what happens. I think if you start documenting more stuff, you start sending more registered letters, you particularly send it to the right people, they're going to start to get a little concerned. Because you start to create a legal paper trail that's shown they're not acting if they don't come to get those pallets for you. Because one of the things I've been told is, yeah, we call them, but they don't come get them. And we have limited capacity. What you need to do is find out in this state how long that can happen, and then when they've abandoned it. And they don't want to get a lot of abandoned pallets in California because that news will spread like wildfire across the United States. And trust me, I know some people in Australia who are financial analysts who would be very scared to hear that, right? The other thing I know that CHEP is likely going to do is that they're going to really try to outlast you. They're going to try to get you to spend money that you don't have. But here's my strategy. Here's what I suggest you do. First of all, band together. If you work together and you have enough volume, that will cause them to pay attention. But when you send that letter, you need to let them know you're serious. You need to let them know that you will bring a lawsuit as a group or individuals. You need to let them know the big thing is, I wouldn't return those pallets to them. I'd make them come get them. If everyone in this room, and I've said this before in our magazine, if everyone in this room said, I'll take your 98 cents as a deposit, it doesn't cover my cost, but I ain't shipping them to you. Come get them. And you guys have enough control over enough volume in California, that more than anything would bring them to the negotiating table. Because they know their real cost to handle it themselves. And it's not 98 cents. It's not $2.25. So first thing, don't return them. Make them come get them. Now, don't hold on to them. Make them come get them. And whether or not you load them or not, you can be a nice person to load them or not. That's up to you. The other thing I would do is if you figure out that your costs are different, I'd send them itemized bills for here's what our costs really are. And when they don't want to pay it, you sue them in small claims court. If 30 of you sued them in small claims court, you know what that would do to their legal department? Those lawyers are $5,000 an hour. Yeah. You talk real money. That's going to really, because they got to get their legal department going. All you're doing is just going to small claims court. Now, here's the deal. I think in the state of California, you can only do that for under $5,000 worth of value. You can only do it a couple times a year at that rate. But if enough of you did it, that alone will be part of what would bring them to the negotiating table. And I'm not encouraging lawsuits. I wish you didn't have to do this. But I'm telling you, the way the laws work, a lot of little cuts will kill a big giant bigger than sometimes just one big cut will, right? The other thing is if they're not willing to pay, this different fees, you could also start using PR against them, right? Here's our cost. You need to be able to explain it. Here's our deal. We had to hire extra people to handle these pallets. We had to actually rent extra space for it. And now it's a fire hazard. Oh, and we have so-and-so over here, and he has back problems now because that pallet weighs more than anybody else's. Get them on TV saying that. I'm just saying, there's ways to go about this. Now, here's the deal. Hopefully, you won't have to do that. Hopefully, you'll be able to get them to come together and to work with it. My experience has been that's not the case. My experience is you're going to have to fight for your rights. Now, here's the deal. I'm not anti any of these rental companies. I think they've actually developed a good business model in many ways. And they've actually provided some good services for their customers. I just think sometimes they've done it to the expense of you in this room. And that's where you've got to decide what you want to do. I will say this. If you decide that you want to have this fight, it will be a fight. They're not going to lay down. There are multi-billion-dollar companies who come with everything they got. But I've seen companies that have been little companies that have stood up and they've been able to defend themselves and secure their rights. As I come down the home stretch here, I want to discuss a few things with you that I think you shouldn't do. Don't hold on to those pallets. There's a legal term that's called clean hands. Think of it like, some of you have more than one children. Let me see a hands. How many people have more than one children here?
More than one child?
More than one child, yeah. I figure there might be more. Okay, anyway. You know that when the kids get in a fight, right? What's the first thing you do? Well, but Johnny did this, right? Well, but Bobby did this. That's what clean hands is all about. If CHEP can't say, but so-and-so pallet did this, because you didn't do anything wrong, then in court, who looks like the bad guy? In the court of public opinion, who looks like the bad guy? Blue, red, black, green. I'll pick a color. They did, right? Versus you. So for you, if you can not hold on to those pallets, allow them access, because as soon as you hold on to them, they're going to sue you for conversion. I'm willing to suggest that. And people go, yeah, but they didn't. That didn't happen for Ricky Mock. In Georgia, they had a unique law called the Naked Depository Law that went all the way back to the Civil War that said if you have safeguarded someone's property, you are allowed to hold that until they pay for the value of safeguarding that. I don't believe you have a similar law in the state, although I don't know. That's another thing you'd want to hire a lawyer to find out. And things like that are different. But I also think that if you band together, and particularly if you start working on calculating what your costs are, so you know what those costs are and you can defend those, that's when you go before a judge in a small claims court or whatever you're doing. Or the cops come in and go, look, you have these pallets, you got to let them have them. Yeah, we'll let them have them. But while you're here, we'll let you know what these guys have done to us. Here's our proof. Oh, and while you're at it, call the local business newspaper to come in. I'm serious. I used to work for one of the largest PR firms in the world. A little bit of PR is going to cause a lot of nightmare. I'm just saying that. That's going to do a whole lot more than your letter, I'll be honest. Somebody from the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, or LA Times calling up CHEP's PR person to ask them about this, that will get moved up to CHEP high command pretty quickly. An ideal asset recovery program. Here's what I think, to be perfectly honest. And actually, I don't know that the last asset recovery program was that unfair. I think it depends upon the person. I've talked to some people who said it was pretty fair. I've talked to others who said it wasn't. But to me, it really is what's your cost into it? And I would have a base rate nationwide. And then on top of that, they already have a fuel surcharge that we got because a recycler stood up and fought for it. So realize if you fight for something now, you're not just fighting for your company, you're fighting for the entire industry. And let me be honest, a lot of these other guys I've talked to on the East Coast, they've already given up. So I guess it's your turn, right? West Coast. West Coast, you're gonna bring the law, right? I also think that the labor rates are different. So I would have some type of provision that figures out that the labor rates in Indiana are very different than your labor rates. And I'd have something that allows for a decent profit, and I think it ought to be something that you're going to make more on that than you would on your whitewood, because the whitewood's your real business. When you're doing this stuff for the rental companies, you're really helping out your competitor. You should ought to be able to do that at a higher profit, I think. That just seems kind of like an American kind of value, I think. So coming down the home stretch, we push out this MARC report, the recycle records. One of the reasons I'm here. I would love to have as many of you subscribe as possible. It talks about core pricing, talks about what's going on in the industry. And as I said, if people had been reading it here in this room, you would have known about this before probably very many of you knew about it. We cover all sorts of things in it. And I can work with Edgar to get copies so y'all can see it or whatever. It's not that expensive. It's basically $125 a year if you want the online version. It's $145 if you want the print. But that's one of the reasons why I think people subscribe is we cover things in detail in ways that no one does. It's kind of like consulting in a way. And the other thing that I want to do is I want to help answer questions. I want to help you. I've already told Edgar that part of me coming here to speak was to help however I can. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert on the law in this area. I've read a lot, and I've talked a lot, and I've written a lot. But I do think if you band together, if you develop a good strategy, you'll be able to probably get something done. Can I guarantee you a win? No, I can't. There's only one guy in the country who's getting $5 a pallet, and that's because he had the guts to be David when everybody else wasn't willing to be David versus Goliath. Anyway, that's all I have to share. I hope that is something that inspired you. I hope it informed a little bit. I hope it kind of brought some perspective to this. And the question is, you've got to decide what do you want to do as individual companies? What do you want to do as an industry here in California? I think if you band together, you can fight for your rights. You can fight for fair compensation. And you can make sure that maybe if these other guys in the East Coast are going to kind of just roll over and give up, you guys don't have to do that. And I think it really depends upon every single person here. So, that's it.